Slater, Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. We're going to talk about the Georgia election bill some more. This is the one that says you need an ID to vote, and the left is calling it Jim Crow. Oh, we're going back to the Jim Crow voter suppression, freaking out. I've never seen anything like this, outright blatant, in your face lying about a bill in my entire life. And everyone involved knows it. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows that they're lying to you. And you know it because you watched the first. And I'm not even mad at the Democrats and the media for lying like this. Of course they will. They're master marketers. I get frustrated because there's so many people who still think that CNN is news. There's still people who think that 60 Minutes is the news. We have a story about that tomorrow with 60 Minutes just lying to your face about Governor DeSantis in Florida. I get frustrated because how can people be so easily deceived still? Have you not been paying attention the last 4 years? That's where my frustration, does that make sense? Like, I know they're gonna lie, but people are still buying it. And I'll tell you, Republicans better get better at messaging, or else they're definitely going to lose 2022 and 2024. Every institution in America is working against the Republican Party. And Republicans are terrible messengers. They must get in front of their narrative, or else the Democrats and the media are going to set it against them every time. I'll talk about that coming up in just a minute as well. So last week, this Georgia election bill, we went over the 4 biggest lies in this bill that the president and the media are telling you. Starting with that no one can give you water. You can't drink water when you're in line. It's not true. It makes lines longer. No, it makes them shorter. Oh, well, it closes the polls at 5 o'clock, so working people can't vote. No, it doesn't. And it ends Sunday voting. Nope, not that either. All lies repeated by Joe Biden himself and, of course, the media the entire way. And then what made it way worse was Major League Baseball coming in and saying that they're no longer going to have their all-star game in Atlanta because they can't be a part of such a racist piece of legislation. Are you kidding me? Did you read the bill? We're going to read the bill in just a second here. We're going to read from the bill. I have a crazy idea. Any news story you've seen about the CNN, New York Times, has anyone actually read the bill? Has anyone in Major League Baseball read the bill? We're going to read the bill in just a second. So Major League Baseball is against this bill in China, even though, as Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas pointed out, China has been expanding their business in China. Major League Baseball has been expanding their business in China. How many days of early voting does China have? In Chinese elections, how many days of early voting do they have? Well, Georgia has 19. Major League Baseball says it's racist. LeBron James is happy with it. Black Lives Matter, right? He also has no comment on anything, ever, having to do with his overlords in China. Also, the county, Cobb County, where the stadium is in Atlanta, is set to lose $100 million in economic investment for leaving the game, for moving the game out of the city. All based on nothing, all based on lies. So I want to focus on the root of this. The root of their freaking out is that the law requires people to have an ID to vote and an ID to mail in your vote. That's what the left hates. They don't want that. I had a caller on my radio show in San Diego on Friday. Called in and said, Slater, you're all wrong about this. You're all wrong about this bill. This bill makes it harder for black people to vote. And I said, "Ooh, sir, that's a bold claim. That is a bold claim, seriously. This bill makes it harder for black people to vote?" And I asked him, I said, well, how? It's a bold claim. You need to back that up. How does it make it harder for black people to vote? And he said, oh, because it requires black people to have an ID. I cannot get over how offensive that is. Are black people too stupid to get an ID? How patronizing is that? How bigotry of low expectations is that? Go to a black person on the street and say, hey man, do you have an ID? they'll say, oh yeah, of course, just do it. Right? I mean, like, what are you talking about? Or I'll tell you what, if you're really so concerned about black people, why don't you go up to one on the street, go find a black person and say, excuse me, do you speak English? Do you understand the words I'm saying? Okay, good. Here, poor child, let me help you. Come with me to the DMV and I'll help you get a form of identification so that you can vote. Do you need my, of course you need my help. Is there anything else you need me to help you do? Do you have food? Would you like me to chew it for you and spit it in your mouth like a mommy bird? You poor black person, it must be so hard for you to be so incapable of doing the basic tasks that us white people have achieved so effortlessly. How do you survive, black person? How do you do it? Here, we'll talk about it on the way to the DMV. How unbelievably patronizing and condescending and arrogant and snobby is that? This bill makes it harder for black people to vote. Why? Because they need an ID? And? They're free. And so do I, and so does everyone else. So absurd. To get a library card, I'll never forget when I moved to San Diego, I went to go get a library card. I had my ID, and that was it. And I went, and they're like, oh, you need like a bill. You need a bill addressed to your home. I was like, a bill? What, like a utility bill or something? What are you talking about? It's a library card. It's harder to get a library card than it is to vote. Are libraries racist? And you know the thing, you need one to get into a nightclub, or nightclub's racist, you need it to travel to another country, buy alcohol. There's approximately 6 billion other situations in life where you need an ID. But an ID to vote in order to protect the integrity of your vote is worse than Jim Crow. It's white supremacy, it's the Holocaust. Polling stations, we should rename them concentration camps. No water, you're not allowed to drink water. It's torture. Crazy. All right, let me read the bill. Let's read the bill. Because even the part about how you need a photo ID, even that's not true. You want the true story? Let's do this. No, actually, before we do this, let me state my opinion up front. I don't think this bill in Georgia goes far enough. It's not like, it really doesn't do anything. As I'll explain in just a second, we need our elections to look like they do in France. It pains me to say it, but we need to do it what they do in France and Canada, where it's one day, you get 1 day to vote. Maybe I'll give you 1 day of early voting. If maybe we can negotiate that. And I don't even think we should have absentee voting, because we haven't had that forever, but okay, we'll give you absentee voting. If you absolutely, like if you cannot leave your home, or you know you're gonna be out of town, and we've had that for many years before it became totally corrupted like they do in Wisconsin, maybe I'll grant you that. But also there's an argument to be made that if you're not in town that day, tough noogies. You just don't get to vote. Schedule your life around this very important thing. So that would be my stance. Again, what they do in France is not that crazy. This Georgia bill doesn't do anything. It doesn't do any of that. Again, 19 days of early voting. It's 195 pages long. It should be 2. Here's voting day. Bring your ID. You can vote. Boom. That's it. I'll give you 2 pages to write that bill. All right, so here's the true story. Right? Here's the law. Right? Again, how many news outlets have actually taken the time to read it? Here's what it says. This is about mail-in voting. All right, specifically about mail-in voting. The elector, that's you, the voter, shall print the number of his or her Georgia driver's license or identification card issued pursuant to Article 5 of Chapter 5 of Title 40 in the space provided on the outer oath envelope. Okay, so you gotta write your driver's license number. Okay, that's step 1. The elector shall also print his or her date of birth in the space provided, okay? If the elector, does not have a Georgia driver's license, the voter shall so affirm in the space provided on the outer oath envelope and print the last 4 digits of his or her social security number in the space provided on the outer envelope. So if you don't have an ID, you just give them your social security number. So you don't even need an ID. Now you're thinking, oh, what about those people who don't have social security numbers? Well, let's read on. If the elector does not have a Georgia's driver's license, identification card, those are the free things that they hand out, or a social security number, the elector shall so affirm in the space provided on the outer envelope to place a copy of one of the forms of ID set forth in subsection C of Code Section 21.2.417 in the outer envelope. What in the world is subsection C of Code Section 21.2.417 in the outer envelope? It's a bill. It's some proof that you live where you say you live. That's it. So just recall here, this is all about the whole freak out. The root of the freak out is because, oh, they're requiring people to have an ID. No, they're not. If you don't have a driver's license, that's fine. Just give us your last four of your social. Well, if you don't have that, if you don't have your social, then you can give us what was the third one? So if you don't have that, you give me your social. If you don't have your social, then it says, okay, give us one of these list of things. And here's the list. A copy of a current utility bill, bank statement, government paycheck, or other government document that shows the name and address of such voter. So you just need to give them a utility bill. Just mail in a copy of a utility bill. That's all you need in order to vote. Even if you don't have this list of all these incredibly basic, easy, simple things that almost every single person has, and everyone has got a social security number, right? Even if you don't have that, just give us a copy of your stinking power bill and we'll let you vote. And then, if you don't even have that, if you can't give me nothing, if you have no ID, no utility bill, no paycheck, you got nothing with an address, and again, we'll give you one for free if you want it. Even if you don't have any of those, you can still vote, and we'll mark it as a provisional ballot, and after the election, we will confirm that you're a real person and count your vote. Holy mackerel. And this is Jim Crow? This is Jim Crow? This is the same as murdering black people who try to dare vote. Are you kidding me? So to recap here, the root of this is that you have to have an ID to vote, and that's not even true. This bill doesn't even go nearly far enough as it needs to. So that's the lesson for Republicans, right? First, of course, this is a weak bill. Should have gone way more. But good night, you Republicans need to do better with your messaging. You gotta do better with your PR and your marketing. You gotta get in front of these things. Otherwise, the media and the Democrats will frame it themselves however they want, and now you're on the defense saying, I'm not racist. Well, we're not racist. Well, ridiculous. CBS, they printed an article the other day, 3 ways that companies can help fight Georgia's restrictive new voting law. By the way, is what I just described restrictive? But here's 3 ways that companies can help fight it. You're like, what? Because that's not blatant activism from CBS News. But I'll give you a 4th way, CBS. 4th way to help fight Georgia's restrictive new voting law. Don't be a flaming hypocrite. How about that? True story. Major League Baseball, you order a ticket online, you pick it up at the window, will call ticket. Well, gosh golly, wouldn't you know it? Requires a picture ID. Well, what about black people? What are they supposed to do? Why are you so racist, Major League Baseball? Coming up next, the script. We know the script. We know the routine. But stop falling for it. I'll give you the next part of their script. Coming up next, true story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Slater Crusaders, just to be clear from that last segment, if you want to vote, you need an ID. If you don't have an ID, you give them your social security number. If you don't have a social security number, you give them your water bill. That's voter suppression. That's the Republicans not getting in front of the narrative. We know the left's playbook. We have figured out, here on True Story, we've figured out the secret of the left's playbook. So let's open it up here and get a sneak peek on what's to come every single day. And we can just watch their strategy and watch the script that the Democrats deploy time after time. We saw it with the Georgia bill, but they're going to keep doing it as long as it keeps working. There's a bill in Florida. They're calling it, the left, the media is calling it the anti-riot bill. We'll talk about it another day in more detail, but already the activists and the media say it's a return to the Jim Crow era. This is a clip from Axios. It's a return to the Jim Crow era. See a theme here? Everything that Republicans do in a Republican state is going to be a return to the Jim Crow era. So here's another thing that activists do, modern activists. They cause a scene knowing they're going to get arrested. And then they make this big whole dramatic thing about it, right? And they do it just to get that footage of being arrested because they believe that that gives legitimacy to their cause. And I'm here to tell you that it is an act. People fall for it. The media loves it. It gives them really compelling video and helps them fill time. Let's play the video here, and I'll explain, right after we watch the video, I'll explain everything that's going on. I'll explain who it is, where it is, the whole thing, but just so you know what's happening. Here's.
Stop. What did she do? What did she do? What did she do? Can y'all cite the code? What did she do?
Where are you taking me?
What did she do?
Stop. Where are you taking me? Why are you arresting me?
What did she do? What did she do? What did she do?
Okay, so it goes on like that for a couple minutes. All right. Here's the tweet that went along with it. Here's how it's characterized. Georgia Democratic Representative Park Cannon, that was the woman who was handcuffed being dragged away, Park Cannon, we'll get to her in a minute, was arrested for just trying to watch Governor Kemp in Georgia sign the new voter suppression bill. She was just trying to watch. Look at how she's treated by police. This is straight out of Jim Crow. See? Democratic State Rep Erica Thompson to Georgia, blah, 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 you arrested a sitting representative. This is sitting on the 56th, this is happening on the 56th anniversary of Selma to Montgomery March for Voting Rights and the murder of civil rights activist Viola Liuzzo. History repeating itself in all the wrong ways. Park Cannon's shocking arrest made me think of Maceo Snipes, black World War II vet who voted in the 1946 Georgia Democratic primary, first black man to vote in Taylor County under Jim Crow. One day later, he was shot in the back by the KKK. This is history of voter suppression in Georgia. Do you see the game? Do you see the game? Right, so here's Park Cannon. Look at what a hero I am. I'm the same. Here, look at this video of me getting arrested. I'm the same as this martyr and these martyrs and all the great civil rights heroes. All right? I'm the same as all these amazing, actually courageous people of the past. Do you see the act? They're trying to get a piece of their nobility from the past civil rights heroes. How do you do that? Well, one way is to get arrested. Oh, look, I'm just like them. I want to tell you two stories here. Two stories. One of Maceo Snipes and the other of that representative, Park Cannon. You tell me who's more oppressed. First, Maceo Snipes, 1946. He was a World War II Army veteran. First black person to vote in a primary in that county in Georgia. This is a part of the state where the KKK had a lot of power, again, 1946. The KKK said before the election that if any black man votes, they're going to lynch them. Maceo showed real courage, actual courage, faced down the KKK, and went to vote. The next day, 4 white men went to his house, shot him in the back. Maybe to make this story even worse, his mom walked him 3 miles to somebody's house, and they got him to the hospital, and they did not treat him They did not treat him for 6 hours because they said that they did not have any black blood. He died. Then the trial, and the murderer says that Maceo owed me $10, and I just went to go get my money. And Maceo pulled out a knife, and it was just self-defense. And the jury bought it, and he was freed. That is an absolutely horrific story. Every single thing about that is horrific. 75 years ago, which is important to know, but horrific. So that's story number one, Maceo Snipes. Story number two, Park Cannon, state rep from Atlanta. She's 24, black woman and queer. She was a linguistics major at UNC Chapel Hill, minored in, shocker of all shockers, women's and gender studies. CNN wrote about her in 2016. They said, the queer black millennial who plans to shake up Georgia politics. So when the governor signed the bill that, as we just articulated in the last segment, makes it easier to vote in Georgia, she had a hissy fit, went to the room where it was being signed and started banging on the door. And she had some people with her filming her and the whole thing. And their number one goal was just to disturb the signing of the bill. Oh, no, she just wanted to watch, is all. So she kept banging on the door. And actually, if you listen to video from during the signing, you can hear her on the outside slamming on the door. So the police came and said, you can't do that. So she went to another door marked governors and staff only. And she knocked on that door a bunch, and she kept doing it. She was warned twice that if she keeps doing that, you're going to be arrested. And I guarantee you she thought, well, would you just do it already? I'm here to get arrested. Can you just arrest me, drag me away? I have this mask on, so it looks like I'm being muffled. You drag me away, I'm not gonna come with you, actually. So you're literally gonna have to drag me, and it's gonna look all big, and I'm gonna have my people around me saying, oh, let her go, let her go, let her go. We're gonna write a tweet about how this is the new Jim Crow, so could you just do it already? So she kept banging and banging and banging, and finally she got arrested, and they handcuffed her and dragged her out of the building. So, which of these two people are the real victims? Which of these two people are the real martyrs? Which of these two people have actually experienced voter suppression? The one who was shot in the back for voting, or the state rep? Which of these two people are actually courageous? Which of these two people actually experience Jim Crow? I just imagine if Maceo Snipes came back to life and met with Park Cannon. And Park said, Maceo, you're not going to believe what I have to endure. And Maceo says, let me know. Let me hear it. What is it? Well, when I vote, hold on. Let me stop you there. When you vote, you mean you're allowed to vote? I wasn't allowed. Well, they make it very difficult to vote. They require me to have an ID. You don't have an ID? I had an ID. 1946, I had an ID. You don't have an ID now? Wait until Maceo finds out that black people can not only vote, but black people can run for office. Black people can vote for her, the queer black woman. Oh, but Maceo, you don't understand. You're not allowed to drink water when you're voting. So let me tell you a little something about World War II, lady. Let's say, what do you mean you're not allowed to drink water? They don't let you drink water? Well, I mean, they let you drink water. And the poll workers can hand you water. It's just that the campaign workers can't, but the poll workers can. But you just don't understand, Maceo. You don't understand how difficult this is for black people. To the guy who was shot in the back for voting. Today in America, you can be black and stand in line and drink water from Fiji. Water straight from a spring in Fiji for $1 and still complain how oppressed you are and compare yourself to a World War II veteran who stared down the KKK to vote. I can't fathom how that conversation would go. It's hard to feel a lot of sympathy for the queer women and gender studies state representative who was arrested for just wanting to watch the signing. That's all I want to do. I just want to watch. True story. Don't be manipulated by absolute flaming narcissists, which is all she is. Find people with real courage. Be inspired by them. Men like Maceo Snipes. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, we've been talking the whole show about this Georgia voting bill that requires an ID to vote, even though we just outlined it doesn't even require an ID to vote. Just got to give them your water bill, and that's sufficient. And the Democrats are freaking out, calling it Jim Crow and all the rest, Major League Baseball. You know the whole thing. This is a statement from the 45th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. It's finally time for Republicans and conservatives to fight back. We have more people than they do by far. Boycott Major League Baseball, Coca-Cola, Delta Airlines, JP Morgan Chase, Viacom CBS, Citigroup, Cisco, UPS, Merck. Don't go back to their products until they relent. We can play the game better than them. Never submit, never give up. The radical left will destroy our country. If we let them, we will not become a socialist nation. Happy Easter. John Phillips is here. KABC, Orange County Register. What's going on, John?
Hey, how are you?
Good, man. Before we get to Trump here, I want to get your take on the Georgia bill in general. I am so frustrated. Listen, the media and the Democrats, they lie all the time, and there's nothing new, but this just frustrates me that so many people have just fallen for this, and I'm angry. Talk me off the ledge here.
Yeah, well, I think this is yet another case where social media screwed all of us because you have people who know nothing talking to people who know less. And so you have all of these ill-informed people coming down with all of these opinions that are based on no facts at all. And let's go ahead and put Major League Baseball at the top of the list. I mean, talk about a business that doesn't fundamentally understand their customers. If they think that the woke crowd is the crowd that's buying tickets and going to games, they are sadly mistaken. The only time those people go to stadiums is when they're getting vaccinated. And to that point, I share a season ticket package to the Angels with a bunch of friends. And if I pick up my tickets at will call, there is no way they're giving me those tickets unless I show them picture ID. And if I don't produce the picture ID, I'm not going in the turnstiles and seeing the game. So they're hypocrites in addition to being dumb.
I don't understand the boardroom that all these Major League Baseball guys were in, and they decided to do this. Like, was there not a single person there who said, hey guys, let's read the bill, or maybe Joe Biden is wrong, or maybe CNN's wrong? It's like, what was their thinking, you think?
Well, I think that you have two different groups of people. You have the owners of the teams, which have a very different attitude about this. I know I've talked to some of my sources in Major League Baseball, and I know that many of the broadcasters, many of the owners, many of the players are upset with the front office for doing this. But in the front office, it's just a bunch of suits. It's a bunch of people who would otherwise be working for all of these other corporations who are doing the same thing. And they're completely disconnected from the product. They're disconnected from their owners. They're disconnected from their fans.
Yeah. What's your policy on boycotts?
I don't like them. I mean, if I had to keep track of every company that does something that I disagree with politically, I would sit in my house beyond the pandemic and have nothing to do. I don't care what politics are. I don't care what you think about, the elections or any number of subjects. If I like your hamburger, I'm going to eat it. If I like your product, I'm going to use it. And I don't bother with any of that.
Yeah. So Jesse Kelly, I don't want to speak on behalf of him, but he wrote a tweet afterwards. He was like, so what are you going to do, fans? You're just going to keep forking over your money and buying tickets and buying food and giving $300 to go to the ball game while they hate you? is there a line that you would have, John, where you'd be like, oh yeah, this company's gone too far? I got heat the other day. I made a video for Locals, MikeSlater.locals.com, and I was wearing a Nike t-shirt. And someone's like, oh, you shouldn't support Nike, right? So like, is there a line for you think?
Yeah, but what clothing brand isn't left-wing lunatic? I mean, we'd be naked if we enforced all of, those rules on all of these companies. Again, as a long-suffering Angel fan watching games in empty stadiums, Angel fans have been boycotting baseball long before it was popular.
Do we have time here? Yeah, let's play this Charles Barkley clip because I like Charles Barkley. Here's.
Man, I think most white people and black people are great people. I really believe that in my heart. But I think our system is set up where our politicians, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, are designed to make us not like each other so they can keep their grasp of money and power. They divide and conquer. I truly believe in my heart most white people and black people are awesome people, but we're so stupid following our politicians, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. And their only job is, hey, let's make these people not like each other. We don't live in their neighborhoods. We all got money. Let's make the whites and blacks not like each other. Let's make rich people and poor people not like each other. Let's scramble the middle class. I truly believe that in my heart.
And you agree with Charles?
Oh, absolutely. Although I would add one caveat. I don't think it's necessarily the politicians. I think it's the media. The media is the one that's making us hate each other, and the politicians are just following what the media is doing. There is not a story that exists that the mainstream media covers where they don't look at it through the lens of race. And sometimes issues just aren't racial, but they bend over backwards to make it racial, and they pat themselves on the back for doing it. And what they do is they make people who are reading their papers and watching their shows look at their neighbors who they would otherwise like with a skeptical eye. And I think it's unbelievably damaging. And I put the finger of blame, I point the finger of blame at the media.
Someone called me from, he lived in Europe a bunch, he lived in Canada, and he's like, hey, they don't talk like this in other countries. Like, there's people of all different races, but like, this is like a weirdly American thing, and you guys should knock it off. Let me ask you a professional question. So, someone listened to my show the other day, and they're Democrat or whatever. And they're like, Slater, why do you group people? You call people on the left. And I'm just against that. So just like, I'm asking for your advice as a fellow radio show host as well. Like, how do we talk about people and in groups who have shared ideas without then being accused of grouping people and like making boundaries? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that when we do that too broadly, that's a mistake. Because we think of the left, we think of Democrats as being, all like George Soros or all like, Rosie O'Donnell. When the reality is that, many of them are much more conservative than we give them credit for. And they might be partisan, but they're not necessarily left wing. And I think those are two very different things. So, it's always good to treat people as individuals and try not to paint with too broad a stroke.
Yeah. So what word do you use, or how do you group? You said the media, right?
Yeah.
What other words do you use to kind of describe the people who are really pulling the strings here?
I can do it with the media because they are collectively mental patients, so I have no problem doing that. But just your average person, I think, is a lot more sane than the news media. I mean, go back to that Democratic primary. The news media thought it was going to be Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren. And who ended up winning the primary? The guy who was the least left wing out of the entire crowd. Now, he's been co-opted by the woke crowd, and he's far more to the left as president than he was as a candidate, but he didn't present himself that way, and he won the primary against everything that the people in the media were telling us was going to happen. So I just think that most people out there are more sane than we give them credit for, with the exception of the media, who have collectively lost their minds.
Yeah, I think it's that, and there's a very small group of far left activists who have way disproportionate amount of influence and power and megaphone that are dictating things way too much. I think that's right. Real quick, the recall in California, Governor Newsom. So they're way over the number of signatures needed. They still have to, confirm it and all that stuff, but there's definitely going to be a recall. Newsom's, started his campaign against it. What's your take on the status of that? Are the Democrats going to fight against him? Are they going to unite around him? What do you think?
Yeah, the Democrats are going to circle the wagons. But again, this could not qualify with Republicans alone. There were declined to states who signed it. There were Democrats who signed it. And the beef with Newsom is not even necessarily ideological. The beef with Newsom is a question of confidence. And you just see this anger that's just brewing through the country, where it's not just with Newsom, but there's an effort to recall the district attorney, the George Soros-funded district attorney of Los Angeles. We're seeing recalls in Seattle. We're seeing more recalls at Ford Motors. And I think that part of it is that the public has just finally had enough with these people. Now, whether or not it's successful, I don't know. I mean, we're going to have to see which candidates file. There has to be a candidate that captures the imagination of the public the way that Arnold Schwarzenegger did. So far, we don't have one of those candidates, but you never know. Surprises happen here in California every so often.
Yeah. John Phillips, you're the man. KABC, Orange County Register. Follow John on Twitter, the whole thing. Thanks, John. Always good to talk to you, brother. Nice, man. Coming up next, Professor Vincent Racaniello. My first question is going to be, what do we know on how long these vaccines work? Remember in the beginning, it was like, does it only work for 90 days? Does it work for a year? Does it work for 10 years? What do we know? Talk about that next. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, let's get the latest with COVID and vaccines from Professor Vincent Racaniello. He's the professor of virology at Columbia University. Professor, how are you, sir?
I love the rolling R you gave me today. Nice job.
Racaniello. Professor, I was listening to your podcast the other day, and you did a whole story on how they can detect COVID in sewage. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering how much they would have to pay you to be the person who goes and collects the sewage underground in New York City to determine COVID. Is that a job you're lined up for?
Listen, if it were important to get the results, I would do it.
Oh, man of the people. Way to sacrifice. I want to come back around to that, but let's get to maybe some more important things first. So someone asked me this morning, what do we know right now with how long these vaccines are lasting? How long do we get immunity, Professor?
Well, this is a great question. And, it is not so far away from the time we've started to vaccinate, so hard to know. But all things look pretty good, in my view, that these vaccines are going to last years. Because, why do I say that? When you get these vaccines, you make a really good immune response. It's strong, it's high, and even though that's going to slowly go down over time, over months and years, you have memory. Your body makes a memory immune response. And so if you ever encounter the virus again, it's going to quickly pull out the cells that it needs to make an immune response. So I think years is the answer, just like many other vaccines. The real key is whether the virus will change enough to get around it. That happens with influenza, right? Every year or so, the virus changes a bit. We have to reformulate the vaccine. It may be that we have to do that with COVID vaccines, but I do think that these vaccines in themselves, I'm talking about the ones we're using here in the U.S. mainly, they're going to give you many years of immunity. I think it's a really good thing.
That's wonderful. Scientifically, is natural immunity or immunity from getting the disease yourself and then recovering from it, is that going to be as strong as a vaccine or less strong?
It really depends on the virus. Some viruses give you lifelong immunity, and the vaccines that we have made give you lifelong immunity. For influenza, the vaccines we have don't give you lifelong immunity. They're not the best vaccines. We need to improve them, and maybe we need to take a page from the COVID playbook for those. So it really depends on the virus.
It says study children show strongest immune response to COVID-19. Do you find that to be true?
I think, kids are, once you're in your teens and so forth, you've got a good immune system. It's all developed. You no longer depend on your mother's, obviously. And you're young, your cells are good, your bone marrow is good. that's the best time for making an immune response. It only goes down from there, as I like to say.
What does your bone marrow have to do with it?
The bone marrow contains cells that are the precursor of all your immune cells, the immune cells, and they're continually being replenished. And if you have an infection, the bone marrow is alerted, say, hey, we need more cells, and they begin to make them, and they come out into the blood.
What are you talking about, Professor? Your bone marrow? Why would your bone marrow have anything to do with it? What's the science behind that?
Oh, these are called stem cells, right? They're in there. They're the precursors of all of the components of the blood in the immune response. That's where we store them, because the cells in the blood, like the B cells and the T cells that are fighting infections, they don't live forever. And so you have to go back to the source, which is the bone marrow. And that's why as you get older, you have less and less bone marrow. You have a harder time making an immune response.
Wow. Why is it stored in the bone marrow? Is it safer there, or?
Yeah, in vertebrates, right? Animals with bones, with backbones, that's where it's stored. It's probably because it's a safe place, right? It's got that nice bony casing, and nothing's going to get at it. That's why some animals like to eat bones, because there's good stuff inside of it.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, on kids, 12 to 15-year-olds, you talked about this on your podcast as well. Pretty impressive vaccine results.
Yeah, Pfizer did a study in 12 to 15-year-olds, something like 2,000 kids. 100% effective is their vaccine at preventing COVID, any kind of COVID. So that's great.
Preventing even getting it.
Just symptoms, not infection necessarily. They didn't look at that, but just some kind of disease from mild all the way up to severe. Nothing.
Whoa.
Great news. And Daniel Griffin, who comes on every week, said the goal is to have 12 and up vaccinated by the end of June, just in time for school in the fall.
Wow, 100%. That's remarkable. What do you say to people who are worried, particularly about giving it to kids? Because again, we've only been doing this for about a year. This isn't like the polio vaccine that we've had a long, long time. Is there any scientific reason why an mRNA vaccine may have consequences down the line as you can see it?
No, I don't see it. See, the mRNA vaccine, it's injected into your arm. It only lasts a couple of days, and then the mRNA is gone. So there's not going to be any long-term persistence of the mRNA. So from what I've seen so far, incredibly safe. No reason to be hesitant. I wish my kids could get it. They're not in line to get it yet, and they would like to be. But I definitely tell them to all go and get it. It's totally safe.
Someone told me the other day that they have a concern that maybe you get some autoimmune disease that may come from this down the road. Any connection you see?
So not so far. We haven't seen that for any of the mRNA vaccines. That wouldn't have anything to do with RNA. It would have to do with the protein that's made the spike, and we don't see any evidence that spike would trigger an autoimmune disease. So I would say there's no evidence that can happen, and I would not worry about it.
Tests. What's the latest with self-tests that we can administer ourselves?
The self-tests are coming out more and more. As Daniel Griffin said, there's a at-home saliva test that looks for nucleic acid. You can even buy that on Amazon for God's sake. There's another test so it's called Q, and the other one is called Dexterity. So I'm happy. These are starting to roll out. They have FDA emergency use approval, and everyone can now start testing themselves. Now, they're not cheap, unfortunately, but I'm glad the technology is there. So if you want to do it before going to work or going to school, you can do that now.
Yeah, and they'll get cheap, I'm sure, right? Wouldn't they? Well, I don't know why they wouldn't get cheap like anything else, right? I had one last question. Darn it. I'll remember. Let me throw it to you. Any other thing else we need to talk about / any bad news? Is there anything discouraging?
So the two discouraging things. First is, we're at a plateau now in the U.S. in terms of cases. We went way down from the huge peak earlier this year, right? That was great. And right here on this show, I said, great sign, it's going to go to zero. But now we're plateauing. So folks, you're proving me wrong. So please, and I think this is because people are not being careful, and it's mostly in the younger age groups that most of the infections are happening. And so, you have to still be careful. You know, people are getting together in groups. They're not wearing their masks and so forth. But we're not quite there yet. So please give it another month or two so that we can get that down. So that's one thing that concerns me, because along with infections, you know, come deaths. The other thing that many people are worried about is the AstraZeneca vaccine. Of course, we don't have it here in the U.S. The clinical trial results were reported a few weeks ago. They look good. But you know, in Europe, we have these rare cases of blood clotting disorders that are associated with use of that vaccine. Now, they're pretty rare. I think 40 or so cases out of 55 million people who have been immunized. And it's not yet clear if they're caused by the vaccine or if it's something that would have happened anyway. And a lot of people are worried about getting that vaccine. But I think that rate, first of all, you can treat clotting disorders. So you pick it up early, you can treat it. And then the rate, 40 out of 55 million, that's very rare. And I think you're more likely to have problems with COVID. So I'm advising people to get that vaccine and just pay attention to your symptoms.
Professor, we got to run. Next week, we'll talk more about your time underneath the sewers of New York City.
Very good.
Collecting stool samples to save America.
All right.
Thanks, Professor. Microbe.tv to watch the Professor's podcast, Microbe.tv. Slater Crusaders will be back tomorrow. We'll talk about the latest attack on Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, by the media. Total hack job, but following the script. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Spread the word.